Hi, everyone. I am Sable Lomax. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm so excited for today's taping of episode 3 of season 2 of the Fearless Futures podcast. You are seriously in for a treat. We have with us Rachel Luff and Zack Rubinstein, and we're going to talk about all things mobilizing the masses, foundational literacy as the bedrock of change. If you haven't tuned in to season 1, that's okay. You can find it on your Apple, your Spotify, and all the other places that podcasts exist these days. But for today, we're going to have a really good conversation. If you've been tuning into season 2 thus far, you'll notice this is the first time we've had 2 guests instead of 1. So that already to me makes it even more special. But honestly, I'm really, really excited for this conversation in particular, because when I think about the work that's required to actually bring transformational ecosystem change to an organization, you can't just focus on the leaders. You can't just focus on those who would be in middle management. There's all this work that has to be done across the masses, across the ecosystem. And if there's 2 people who can speak to that lived reality and living this work in and day out, it's definitely Rachel and Zack from Expedia. So before we jump in, I'm going to read some bios. I have my cue cards here. You know, I love my talk show host cards. Before I do, how do you all feel about having your bios read?
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, celebrity status. Go for
it.
Okay.
Just special. Very
Rachel
special.
said go ahead. Zack said celebrity status. So Rachel with the go ahead. I'm gonna go with yours first. So Rachel Luff is Expedia's Group Strategy Lead of Global Inclusion Learning, where she leads their flagship inclusion learning program, Ally Skills, curates new learning programs, and executes global campaigns to drive participation in inclusion learning. The most recent program Rachel led was a podcast series, Decoding Bias, focused on mitigating bias in the workplace on topics including decision-making, processes, and leadership. So I'm really excited to get your insight today, Rachel. And last but not least, our celebrity, Zack Rubinstein. He is Expedia Group's Director of Inclusion Learning, where he leverages education to create inclusive workplaces and to sustain inclusive action around the globe. He also drives behavior change by creating and delivering custom inclusion learning content on topics ranging from allyship to identity to inclusive language for Expedia Group and their travel partners employees. How many travel partners does Expedia have? Do you know off the top of your head? Is this a trick question?
Travel partners. No, it wouldn't be a trick question probably for those in market management. It's a trick for us.
Yeah,
in inclusion.
That's not.
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
I wouldn't know.
Thinking through like mobilizing the masses, the work that you're directly participating in, it's not just impacting Expedia Group. I'm thinking about the travel partners, and my brain just went, that's a lot of partners. That's a lot of people. That's potential for loads of change, which I think is exciting. Before we jump in, okay. If you think about your inclusion journey, and I've asked this of all of our guests so far, what has been a mic drop learning moment for you? So this could be something in the past. This could be something more recent. Time doesn't matter here, but what has been a mic drop learning for you? And I'll let you 2 decide who should go first, because I don't know who has their moment already.
I can go first. And that's only because I was actually thinking about this the other day. We have our aha moments all the time, especially when we're facilitating workshops. You hear a new perspective, and it's another area of growth for you. I think one of the first aha moments I had in this space was when I was speaking to someone about the safety in cars and how cars are made for men, and how actually the airbags are designed and they can actually cause more injuries to women. And that for me was the beginning of my journey in thinking, but hang on a minute, the world's not designed for everyone. And I think ever since then, I've just had a lot more clarity and, insight into things that you maybe had a trust in or just believed to be a certain way, not being like that. And that was really kind of like, that was when the door opened for me. And I was like, okay, this is something that I really kind of want to learn more about and have more awareness of. But over to you, Zach. I'm intrigued to hear yours.
I know, that was a good one. Mine was probably my transition into Expedia Group, because I was working in DEI in the field, but in higher education. So at a couple universities and colleges in the United States, but specifically in diversity centers and multicultural centers, which I know that is actually a fairly US centric thing in higher education. But that meant that the populations of students that I was working with mostly did not look like myself. And maybe besides the Jewish group or the Pride group, I didn't identify with them. And so I felt a pretty strong connection of, I'm doing this work for the people that need it, for the people that are asking for it. Moving to Expedia Group, global corporate, headquartered in Seattle, I literally was in a space of people that really looked like me. I was even within an engineering part of the organization. So there were a lot of cisgendered white men, and a lot of them were straight. Most of them weren't Jewish, but just in terms of the identities I saw around me, I almost felt like I sold out. I was like, oh, what did I do? I'm going the opposite way. But my kind of aha mic drop was that there is a particular space for cis white men doing this work for other cis white men. And of course, we'll probably get into this, but it's allyship at the end of the day. But I didn't think I had a space there until I started realizing that other white men actually, they found it to be a bit of a bridge talking to another white guy. I think the defenses went down a little bit.
I could see that.
You know what I mean? They were like, oh, okay, you're kind of doing this. I bet you've been on a journey. You probably don't know everything and you're still learning. I think they could rationalize it a bit more. So it helped me stick with it, because obviously I still work at Expedia.
Thank you both for that. Rachel, I remember watching something. I don't know if it was the Learning Channel, but one of those channels where they're like, we've learned from airplane crashes and car crashes. It's a channel that talks about all things death. Honestly, it's morbid. This is not a good example, but I remember that learning moment for me too. And it was like, considering how many people drive a vehicle daily, how have we only designed protection for men? And then not of a certain height and weight, like how specific, the scientists and engineers broke it down. So yeah, that just accessibility and things and, safety. I love that example. I don't love that it exists, but I do love that example. And thank you for that, Zach. I'm not going to say thank you 1,000 times because there's so many things I want to dig into. So, random fun fact. This is going to make sense. I promise. I used to sing in a choir. We actually won awards. Sometimes we sung a cappella. Sometimes we had music behind us. But it was very, very important that we were all singing from the same hymn sheet. So back then I sang soprano. I'm sure I can't hit any of those notes now. You have your alto section, your tenor section, baritone. I mean, it can get real complicated. Well, not complicated, but first soprano, second soprano, it could be layers. But when you brought it all together, there was a sound. We were all on one accord. Everyone had their part, but when you put all the parts together, it made the whole. When I think about mobilizing the masses and even like having a true bedrock, a foundation, a literacy that we all share, how have you experienced, actually getting folks to get on the same hymn sheet? You might have your part senior leader, you might have your part executive, individual contributor, people manager, so forth and so forth. But we have to be on the same sheet while doing our respective parts. What has that process been like for you both? And since you went first, Rachel, last time, I'm going to pick on you this time, Zach.
Fair. I would say it took us almost speaking the same language. And we weren't at first. I think when both, Rachel and I started out, because we've been on the same team for a while now, DEI at Expedia Group was bringing in speakers. It was a lot of awareness-based events and a bit of a checkbox exercise for most of them. And that happens at a lot of organizations that
Yeah,
are really focusing
that's
on the
common.
impact. Yeah. And so when we wanted to start bringing people together, we could say mobilizing everybody, we started with the foundation of ally skills.
Hmm.
So of course, it is the program that Rachel runs, so she'll have a lot to talk about it. But I think within allyship, that created a language, a shared language.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody knew what allyship was, and the more offices in more locations and countries that we went to, we actually realized that the definition was different.
Mm.
And when we would just say allyship, it was interpreted in 100 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a lot of that foundational work, road shows, doing workshops in a lot of those offices, using localization to understand how it's coming out in those places and translated to get the company on one page. And it took a while.
Oh, well, yeah, that's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
And then the terrain that Expedia has, but this idea of shared definitions, shared understanding, it's so important. And it's something that we at Fearless spend a lot of time with and on, because you're right. I might say, marginalized, and there's 18 different definitions in the room. And then that can lead to tension and defense and miscommunication because we're just not defining it the same way. So I'm really glad you raised that. Like, one of the key factors and components is when I say this word and you say this word, we have a shared understanding of what that means. Rachel, what about you? Because Zach definitely mentioned your program.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but I think, really going right back to the foundations, I think something I learned very quickly at the beginning of that journey was definitions are so important to the point where, yes, you want to be on the same, like singing the same hymn sheet, but also just understanding what that word actually means. So people throw around the word ally all the time, diversity and inclusion all the time. And I would say a lot of the time when, you ask someone, so what do you mean by that? They don't really have an answer. It's just been used time and time and time again that it gets very fatigued, and the very purpose and the very moment and the reason you're using that word gets forgotten. So, we actually at Expedia Group went through a bit of a exercise a couple of years ago of differentiating between diversity and inclusion to really show that they are very different components and they do very different things. They're important and they're just as important as one another, but you need one to have the other work, and they work kind of in a tangent. And I think that for our company, even that as a kind of learning moment was huge in helping people really understand what we're trying to do. Because I think people just say, diversity and inclusion, equity, and it just didn't really mean anything. So we were just, yeah, exactly. And the meaning had been lost. So I think trying to bring the meaning back into those words is super important as well. Yeah.
I'm just picturing a glossary here. It's like when you're back in school, go walk away, memorize these words, be able to use them in a sentence, and let's come back and see if we have this understanding. Obviously, facilitated far differently, but that same root, that vocabulary matters, and definitions and understanding matters, especially in this space. How are we going to have these really rich, nuanced conversations if we're defining things in different ways? In terms of allyship, because you both brought this up just now, when you were bringing this word up, what were the different ways that people were defining it? Because I find it, much like you all mentioned, it's a word that is exhausted. It is used over and over again. And sometimes the meaning might feel watered down depending on how you interpreted its use in that moment. But how have you seen some of your colleagues and folks in this work, like prior to us having this shared language at Expedia, how have you seen folks defining it?
I think for me, it was be nice to one another. And that was kind of the beginning. That was the beginning and the end. That was it. It was, as an ally, I'm going to be nice to you. Yes. And it's as basic as that. And Zach, I don't know if you had any build on that, but that word was people's interpretation. They didn't understand the kind of impact that, being an ally can be and what it really means to be an ally. They thought it was just a label. It was just something you say, I'm an ally, by the way. I'm nice to people. I go out of my way to say hello to people. And you're like, okay, fundamentally, and, if you're going to really create impact here, that's not how we're going to get there. That's great. I'm nice to people too. I wouldn't say that means I'm an ally. And I think it was taking us right back to that moment and saying, okay, let's really try and redefine that. But yeah, Zach, I don't know if you had any other thought on that.
Yeah, it was about the same. When I think of specific examples, sometimes it was kind of the comments you get from men when they might say, I'm an ally. I have a wife. I have a mother. I have sisters. Of course I'm an ally, which is really just, explaining the people around you. But it doesn't actually show action or maybe how you're understanding that. That's one example I can think of. The only other one that is very specific, when we were in certain office locations, actually, I heard people relating ally to more of like military and wartime, World War II allies versus, you know what I mean? Yeah. Which I think is just more salient in some parts of the world than others, of course, because I heard the same interpretation of the word oppression. And it was a bit of a blocker at one point, I remember a few years back, when even from Fearless Futures, when we're talking about global forms of oppression, I would sometimes get into conversations that are like, no, oppression to me is literally looking out my window because potentially there could be a bomb that lands near me. Yeah. And I'm like, it's a totally different interpretation and usage of the word. Yeah.
So honestly, Rachel, I have heard that a lot. Zach, that one is new, but for me in this moment. But when I think about like certain global contexts, I can absolutely see why the first thing that comes to mind is not being nice to people. It's, warfare, battle, et cetera, et cetera. Leaning over to the being nice to people, I think that's a common one. And this idea of self-proclaimed allyship, like I'm an ally, and you mentioned all of your relationships, like you said, Zach. Having worked on, shared language and baseline literacy across Expedia, what have you done in particular to get folks to realize actually allyship is not being nice to people? And then, in this particular context, it's also not, related to battle and war between, countries and things of that sort, but it is active. It's not passive. It's not something you can self-proclaim. It's not waiting for, grand moments to stand up in your superhero cape and say, ally here to the rescue. It's so much more richer than that, and deeper and risky at times. What have you done to get folks to understand the difference between what we might be seeing in a quick LinkedIn post versus like what it really looks like to show up for marginalized people, day in and day out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take this because it's the program I run, and then Zach, please do build. So I think for us at Expedia, we've been on a journey for several years now, and it really started with a workshop. It started very fundamentally a grassroots workshop where the setup was, the first half was talking around terminology, and it was going into what do we mean when we say ally? What do we say when we mean privilege? Going through that terminology and giving everyone within that workshop the same kind of level of knowledge. So that was kind of the first start. And that's kind of going back to what we were saying before around just having the definitions, the glossary, and that side of things. The second half of the workshop was really when we turned it back onto our employees and the participants in the workshop. And we actually had scenarios, and we would give them based on, real life situations that have happened across Expedia. And we've heard time and time again, we would put that scenario to our participants and say, do you think an ally is needed? And cheat here, but they always were. And we'd ask them, is an ally needed? Why is an ally needed? And who is the best ally in this situation? And we would get them as a group to talk through that situation, and they would learn from one another. You could see in those workshops, the moments where people had those aha moments of like, I've been in this situation so many times, and now I understand how I could have been an ally. Because we really took it back to, very relatable, normal, everyday situations that could occur in any workplace, really. And that's really how we started to build the skill set for our employees. And I think we rolled that out globally and at scale. We had an amazing group of voluntary facilitators that have helped us through that. We would not have been able to do it without them. And they also helped localize it as well. So, especially when the pandemic hit, right, we weren't able to go into office, but having people who had the expertise culturally of that, that region, who could talk to it and kind of actually say, I completely understand what you're saying. The context here is slightly different. The oppression might be seen different here, shows up differently. That has been really fundamental to the way we've done things at Expedia. That program still runs now. Over half our employees have been through it. And I would say, having done that, we as a company have been able to really change culturally how we talk around allyship. And there is a lot better understanding around when we say ally, it's not being, to be nice, or as Zack said, it's nothing to do with like military. It's really fundamentally, what can we do for people and our employees and beyond?
I was going to ask, having gone through, I think you said half of, the employees at Expedia, what changes and feedback have you seen from these aha moments? Is it showing up in folks' one-on-ones, meetings, surveys? Where have you seen the progress with like, oh, I didn't know, and now I know, and since then I've been doing better?
I think it's shown up in two ways. I think the first way is people feel heard. So there are a lot of people obviously joining these sessions who are like, oh, okay, we're actually going to be talking about this now. And I have a safe space where I can contribute and I can give my feedback. And when, they're feeling comfortable to do so, to do that. So I think it's really helped in people understanding how serious we are at Expedia to make this a priority. I think the other thing that I've heard be one of the more successful ones is, managers and direct reports having a very real, honest, open conversation that they would not have had before. Mm-hmm. That has been fundamental. We do these sessions generally, and we encourage for people to join from all across the business to try and get as much diverse perspective as possible. But we have also run team sessions, and they're kind of like team builders as well. And you will see in that moment, the leader sitting back and listening. And that has been very impactful. Just listening to other people talking who maybe, when it comes to seniority, they are normally the ones talking and taking up the space, really, and we would kind of say at the beginning of the workshop, make sure there is equity in the voices that we hear today. That's something that we've always done. Mm-hmm. So I think that really helped bridge that and start that conversation. That's definitely some of the key things I've seen. But yeah, Zack, I don't know if you've got other thoughts on that. I know you've probably seen a lot as well.
No, I mean, that was brilliant. I think the only thing I would add that I've seen change from our ally skills now being, how far are we into it? 2.5 years, I suppose, or so.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, 2 to 3 years is at the executive level, how much it's been integrated from top down. And I don't always think a top down approach is the right way to go, but what you can get with C-suite and leaders is accountability. And if they're going to drive the culture, what we see now is even in like performance review time, we do quarterly connects, which is basically just quarterly performance reviews. We have questions and guidance and tools that are specifically DEI related.
And built into the process.
Built into it. Yep. And it talks about allyship. It talks about bias. It talks about career progression and development. And that was not there before.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because oftentimes there might be an organization that has a similar program or a desire. Maybe it's not allyship, maybe it's something else. And they're opening up to the masses, they're encouraging, they're creating safe space and so forth. But there's not a mechanism for accountability to ensure that this wasn't a one-off, this wasn't a tick box exercise. We had some learnings and we're committed to utilizing those learnings in our day-to-day. And we're going to have a way to track, how are we doing? Is progress being made? So knowing that there's that measure there, and it's incorporated into something that's happening regularly, it really sets the tone for how important this work is. This wasn't just like, a lunch and learn. This was like, no, a lunch and commit. And continue.
Right.
Zack, so you do custom trainings.
So they say in my bio.
Zach, you do custom trainings. Come on, you're a celebrity here. And I want to know, like, in the midst of this, depending on the topic, you've decided or it's been raised that, we need to address XYZ. How is it that you're meeting people where they are?
Yeah, great question. Because we don't always do that well. It doesn't always hit right. We've learned a lot because if you think about the team that Rachel and I are on, inclusion learning, we really are focused just on learning. We've only existed for a couple of years. So one major, even 2022 focus is globalization. And that's a lot of times understanding where people are at instead of I'm going to create, let's say for myself, a workshop in Seattle, and I'm going to feel really great, and I'm going to be amazing, and I'm going to go to our Tokyo office and do the exact same program. And everyone's going to love it. No changes. And I'm going to go home on a plane and love it. I have done that, and it did not work out well. So we've learned a lot. Part of it was the foundation of even terminology that we didn't understand. But most of it was cultural nuances and cultural history that we did not understand. And how the same identities we talk about in the United States do not show up the same way in every country.
So, do manifest.
Right, yeah. Right. Like we know racism is global, but racism looks really different in India as it does in the United States. And there's a different history to it, let alone colonization, which adds in, So I think one thing that we've done is utilize our global networks more. So we don't have any program that goes out and any mandate, this is the importance of it, telling any manager that their team has to go until we have gone through our checks. And that includes different levels of hierarchy and title within our organization, different global locations, different identities. We go through a lot of checks at this point to get as much feedback as possible because we're never going to have all the identities in the world on the diversity and inclusion team. We don't have enough resource to hire that many people. But we certainly have it in all of our employees. So we do a lot of checks now, a lot of feedback sessions.
Something I just wanted to tease out is this idea of, and it's connected to colonialism, but there's a hub, there's a team and a company that's responsible for all things DEI. And that team might be split up into like inclusion learning, like yourselves. And you have this team that does this part. Even if this team is only 15 people, there's some splits, in some division within the team to try and maximize capacity and efforts. And depending on the lens and perspective and identities of those team members, we're making global plans that we're just going to send out to everywhere. And although intention might be pure, impact is what we need to focus on. And much like you've learned, we've learned, others who've done this work have learned, I need to contextualize this learning within the geography that I'm in. So yes, racism might have identical roots, but the way the branches and leaves show up, it's going to look different in India than Tokyo, than Ghana, than Brazil, than, I'm just going to say cold, well, actually it's warm today, New Jersey. So I love that you brought that in because I think that's a piece that a lot of us have missed in the past. And for those doing this work to just think about in the future, if you're new to this space, it's like we can't just centralize something and just send it out and expect it to land perfectly and have fantastic outcomes in all our geographies. Like it takes longer to plan, but the outcome is usually a lot stronger and better when we take the time to do that. And then speaking of that, Rachel, how have you incorporated that into your ally skills program, knowing that this is global?
Right. Firstly, I was just nodding my head so much at that because this has to be one of the top themes and priorities for our team. I think, we're very, very aware now that, we are Expedia is headquartered in Seattle. We have a very large population in America, but also half of our employees are outside of there. So you really have to think intentionally about the programs you're putting out. And we have, as anyone in the kind of I&D space and inclusion diversity practitioner space, we will make mistakes. We will do things that we look back on and go, that wasn't right, but we learn from them, right? And I think the way that we have taken that learning within ally skills And it goes back to Zach's point around utilizing and leveraging our incredible employee population is literally that. So with Ally Skills, I mentioned it before, we have a volunteer facility community, and they are based in, I think the last count was in 30 different locations globally.
Awesome.
So we're very lucky at Expedia that we can go to these folks, go to these resources and just say, this is kind of these are the changes we're looking to make. How does this land? And actually that's kind of step one, is making sure your facilitators and the representation you have is there. The second thing is also looking at the scenarios we've been doing and changing them based on the location we're in, the office we're in, and actually even the job function. If you are a traveler, you are a customer focused kind of in a role like that, where you're talking to customers all day, every day, or our travel partners, the kind of scenarios that are going to come up for you are going to be very different compared to if you're more in a back end role, and how that experience will be. So we've changed the way our scenarios are. We've catered them depending on, job function, level. As Zach mentioned before, our executives, we changed the scenarios there to be more about you as a people leader in this situation. How do you show up? How is your privilege in that situation different to a individual contributor? How does that change? And that's how we've really tried to add more nuances into it. And, when we went into this virtual world, we split out our workshops within regions. So we had, for APAC, so for Asia, we had a workshop around there, and we had scenarios based around what we were hearing most themes around, and what was, causing the most kind of questions and most friction. And then we would do the same for EMEA, so for Europe, in the middle, around that area. And then the same for NORAM as well, so North America. Canada, and then obviously LATAM as well, Latin America. So we changed it depending on where we were delivering.
I'm loving hearing all of this, like contextualizing geography, culture, language, experience and such. How have you seen reception to this work, change the more and more you're making sure that this is for you versus one size fits all? I still don't know why that exists for like t-shirts and hats, but here we are in 2022 still saying one size fits all. But, in terms of this work and inclusion learning and like forming this bedrock, like we do want this shared foundation. We do want to mobilize the masses, but recognizing we might not be able to mobilize in the exact same way. Like, how has this been received from your folks, whether it's, at Expedia or your travel partners?
Pretty positively. And it's not being biased because we're at this organization. It really was positive feedback. But I think it was also all of a sudden an open door to ask for more in the best way possible that we had not been doing. So it was really, really well received, that people feel heard. And now I want to give you even more feedback because I've been holding back before because the trust wasn't established yet.
The trust.
Yeah, it just wasn't there because we weren't creating the space for it. We weren't even mentioning it, intentionally. So that was one thing. And then I also realized, even in this one workshop and subsequent programs, Rachel and I, facilitated less and less because we just weren't the best facilitators for that region, for that workshop, for that group. And that was a huge change, letting go and releasing that. We have our expertise and skill sets and we're doing the work on the back end, but it doesn't always mean that we're the face of it. We're not going to be the best face all the time.
I think coming back to your question as well, Sable, I'll just add that it was at Expedia, it's been set as an expectation to participate in this workshop. So we actually had our CEO come out. We weren't quite ready for him to come out with it, but he did. And it was the best thing that ever happened for this program. But he came out and said, this Ally Skills program, I encourage every single one of you to go through this. This is part of your responsibility in your job. This is your accountability. And ever since then, our team has really been focused on making sure when we're talking around inclusion and diversity and equity, that we're really saying that it's everyone's job. It's not just the I&D team, the inclusion diversity team that's just sat over here. And yes, we're a small team. It's everyone.
I love that. I really love that because sometimes I think that because there are these teams that exist, and in some places it's a 2-person team,
Oh,
for like a
yeah.
500, member company. So the teams are very rarely large, even at large entities. And I know large is relative, but let's just say 80,000 plus employees, just to contextualize numbers here. And the teams can often be really small. And it's like, unless we all can split ourselves and clone ourselves and like make 30 Zacks and 100 Rachels and 20 Sables,
What a
it's
world.
truly not, everywhere. And then we suddenly speak all the languages,
Right.
And things of that nature. It's not possible for the responsibility to only sit within those who are strategically responsible, and have a stake in this work. So just the idea of a leader and then the CEO at that sharing, everyone has a role and everyone plays a responsibility in this. I think that's so key. Did you see a shift once that message was, sent out amongst the people?
Most definitely. I mean, me and Zach have to laugh our way through this because it was a very testing time for both of us. I mean, we went from being a grassroots program where we would just, deal with requests. People would say, I want to do this for my team. I want to do this for the office. And we would deliver based on that. It turned completely on its head into this is now a global program where the CEO wants everyone to do this. And we had to very quickly ramp up. And we had amazing momentum behind us the whole way from, our employees who just wanted to give back. The passion, the energy, the enthusiasm is really what has carried this through. I'm just a very lucky person that, gets to say that I helped lead it. But I was just, minor in the real kind of force behind this. And it just it was really a huge culture shift. Hearing the CEO say that and us then delivering a program with, half of our population now going through it. And some of them have gone through it more than once. That's kind of the feedback we've had is, you learn something new every single time you do it because the scenarios might be different. Yeah. And we all do, right? And you learn something new. As a facilitator, the reason me and Zach couldn't let go is because we loved the conversations. I just loved it. We're like, we get paid to do this, to like talk about this stuff and hear about other people's perspectives and places I've never even been able to travel to, just hearing what it's like and the challenges there and how we as, the I&D team can really step up in those places was really valuable to us for sure. Yeah.
And what I'm hearing is by hearing the CEO signal, this is important. This is not a tick box. There's accountability. It almost gives those who wanted to speak up, but might have been tagged as like troublemakers in the past, the wrong risk to take, etc. It gave them permission to say like, hi, Rachel, I want to facilitate. Hi, like I want to participate, because it no longer could have like I'm just going to say a gray cloud over it. It's like, oh, this is sunshine and roses. Also, the CEO said, this is what we're doing now. And I want to be a part of that. You mentioned momentum just now, Rachel. And I want to talk to you too a little bit about that, because what I have found in this space is that sometimes, momentum comes and it goes. It almost can feel like a little bit of a roller coaster. It's like we're working our way up and then we peak and then we just kind of like, ride the wave. What experiences have you had trying to maintain momentum in doing this work? Because one, as folks doing the work, fatigue is just a thing as human beings. And then human beings trying to do this work within a global pandemic has its own layer of, nuance and complexity. But I want to look at it from a different perspective almost. Going back to our earlier conversation around like allyship and what does it mean to be an ally? A lot of times those who will say they're an ally, they get fatigued very quickly. And what stands out to me the most, like in the most recent worldwide example, if you will, the Black Lives Matter movement with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, it was allyship, like woo woo, ally, I am, hear me roar. I bought these books, I put up my black square on Instagram, I retweeted the speech on Twitter. And then within 3 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, depending on the person, it's like, this is too much work. I'm tired. I do not want to talk about this anymore. Say all that to say, what strategies have you used to show people and to really make it real that this is daily work, and folks who have been marginalized for centuries even, they're the ones who are fatigued having to live with oppression or oppressions day in and day out. So what have you done to maintain that momentum? What lessons have you learned? What strategies have you deployed and so forth?
I have one. You want me to start, Rachel?
Go for it. You have
Go ahead.
What have we learned? That's where I kind of sparked something, because when we first started doing this work, I actually think we took the approach of, we need to solve racism. Like, we need to do this, y'all. We're a team. We're being paid to do this. This is our task. So we made a lot of workshops, a lot of listening tours, a lot of resource guides, a lot of speakers, and let's just keep listening and keep talking about it and talking. And that gets you so far. But what I think we only started doing in the past maybe couple of years was realizing we are doing this within some sort of structure, which is a travel company. So as much as I would love for everybody to take everything that Rachel and I do, take it home, talk to your family, talk to everybody around you on the street and get this going, we're actually being paid to do this within a travel lens. And I don't think we had that lens the whole time. So what I mean by that is we started reframing what we do to make it a daily practice by actually looking at, what do you do daily here? What is your job at Expedia Group? Oh, you're in market management. You're the one talking to partners. You're talking to the Vrbo home guests and the owners of that home, or our hotel partners. What are they experiencing? Did they need any sort of training? Are guests coming in and having, like a common complaint that a lot of people in the queer community find is if they come in with, let's say they both identify as women and they're checking in and there's only one bed or two men in one bed, and they're questioned at the front desk. Was that, did you make that correct? Did you really mean two beds? Do you know how to use the system? Like that sort of stuff. That's something that we can do something about. That's part of our travel system. Are you going through TSA, or like, where are all those barriers? And I think once we started aligning our work to Expedia's work, it became more of a daily practice, because people didn't think of it as an extra. They're like, I'm already doing this. You're just teaching me how to look at it in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I think, you going back to the Black Lives Matter movement, that to us was really kind of the wake up call for quite a lot of people. And we really were able to hone in on that. I think, when we're looking now day to day and looking at what we've done and where we're going, I think it goes back to Zach's comment around, we've done a lot of listening, but where do we go from there? And the way that we structure learning and the way that we're going to be bringing our employees through this learning journey in inclusion is we're going to start with awareness, and we want to move through to identification. We want to get to accountability and then get to action. So we have 4 pillars, and not all of our programs will be aligned to every single one of those pillars, but they're on one of them at the very least. And it's really helping for us to help our employees, our travel partners, anyone that's taking our learnings to firstly, have that awareness, but where do you go from there? We've listened now. Where's the action? Where do we go? And that's really what we're trying to build with the momentum is, yes, you will always have those people that, are kind of, we're the gateway in the sense of we have to do the speakers sessions and we do the events, and those are fantastic events and they help build a lot of energy and bring new people in. But then we've got to move people through that whole journey. And I think that's how we've been keeping the momentum, is changing up the way that we are delivering our learning. So it was referenced at the beginning, that we've just launched a podcast series. That's a different type of learning for people. And we had amazing feedback from people. Like, I was just walking the dog and I was able to really listen about how I can mitigate bias at Expedia. Like, that was like revolutionary for a lot of people. And I think it's trialing things and learning new things and just trying to keep that interest. And I think, we know at Expedia that not everyone is listening to us. Not everyone is engaged in our work. There are quite a few different groups. There are those that are hugely engaged and participate and advocate and are allies. You have the group in the middle that maybe think they are, but aren't quite there. And then you have the group that are just very disengaged. who are like, oh, I've got this, or I don't care. This isn't my problem.
Yeah.
And I think we're trying now to obviously keep the engaged, but use them to help bring in the disengaged.
Use a champion.
Because that's exactly, to really try and help continue that movement, because that's really what we're trying to get to, right? And we went back to trying to meet people where they are. This is kind of how we're trying to do it is, there's a team of us that do this, like you said, strategically, but we really need everyone on that journey. And I think these learning programs and helping people have the tools to be able to have those conversations is really fundamental to like continuing that momentum for sure. Yeah.
It was something that you said there, this idea of the word that came to mind was like scaffolded approach. It's like, we're going to start with awareness, but there's a journey, and almost presenting it as a journey, because sometimes I think of momentum. I'm not a runner, to be clear. But it's like if it's a marathon, if we're going to run a marathon, you can't run at your fastest speed in the very beginning. You're not going to have any energy or wind to actually get across the finish line. So almost like presenting this work as a journey, because it truly is a journey. But unlike a marathon, there is no finish line. So I really like what you shared there, Rachel. And it was something, the podcast, so this idea that you can be walking a dog, sending out some emails, or, preparing for a pitch. Well, you might not want to listen to a podcast preparing for a pitch, but this idea of like, here's a new medium in which we're going to provide you additional learning opportunity. And there's a clear commitment in Expedia or at Expedia from the CEO, from your team across the board to this work, where there are some organizations like Basecamp and Coinbase, where it's like, we don't discuss this at work. It's a distraction. It's disruptive. Seeing the changes and the progress that you all are making and mobilizing the masses, like if you could talk to those two companies or others who are saying this is not the place for that, what would you say to them to get them to invest or even take a second look at why inclusion and equity in the workplace is actually really, really important?
I mean, the scariest part about doing this work is the moment right before you do anything, in a way. If you've done nothing, it seems really scary because I don't know what people are going to say. I don't know how people are going to act. I don't even know how to do it myself. I think it's really scary up until you do it. And then a lot is opened up and you'll hear a lot of feedback. And if you're a company that's open to feedback, then that's great. It'll only make you stronger. That's what I would say. I know it does seem scary, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, just on those kind of examples, really, I think the way that we always try and view it at Expedia is you're going to have views across the board all the time. And as the inclusion and diversity team, that is our job to listen, and it's our job to act when necessary. I think we actually saw this kind of become, a discussion that was becoming more prominent around, this whole, what are we allowed to talk about? Is this work? Is this not? Are we allowed, and, at Expedia, we just try to help guide those conversations the best we could. We put resources out there to create a safe space for everyone to lead with a level of respect. It's in our code of conduct that we respect everyone. You might not need to understand them to respect them, but you have to respect them. And I think it was that really helped in all of those very difficult, uncomfortable conversations, in kind of bringing it to a more productive conversation than the heat that comes with a lot of those conversations. And yeah, so we put those resources out there, and I think that really helped us. And maybe it's the culture at Expedia, but we haven't found that to be a huge thing. We have great safe spaces within our inclusion business groups, our employee resource groups, where they have the safe space to talk to one another. The allies can come and learn. We have 8 fantastic ones. So that's another great space for people to have those conversations. But, separate to that, giving other people the tools really, really helps. And, this came up quite a few times. We had workshops where people would say, my religion doesn't allow me to accept someone because of XYZ, within the LGBT community. My religion doesn't allow that. And that's a very hard conversation to be having. And we always took it back to start with respect. And that's where we kind of always landed. And I think that really helped us in those conversations. Yeah.
I also don't think those companies will make it. in the long run. Coming off of the pandemic, and with so many people being more mobile now, everybody, every company, corporate, has seen people leaving. Retention is an issue 100% across the board in every business. And if you're not focusing on equity and culture, there is somebody next door that is at this point. So you have a big risk not to do it and a big reward to do it at this point. It has not always been that way in the past. We all know that.
Right.
I think now in particular, though, get on it.
Zack said, "Will you last? To be determined." I pictured an ellipses. But in terms of, focus areas for 2022, you clearly have, support. You clearly have, just the energy of the team, the desire of the company. You have a lot of those like key tenets required to be able to do this work at a great scale. You have all that behind you. Let's say you have all the resource in the world. So this could be from space, this could be financial, this could be people, all the resource in the world. If you all could work towards or accomplish anything in this space for 2022, what would that be? There's no barriers. There's nothing here to stop you. Okay? We're in inclusion and equity utopia.
Wow. At our own equity space station. I mean,
that's
space station. Tell me more.
I mean, this is the dream, right?
Right, with satellites globally to beam information across an engagement strategy. That kind of goes towards, Rachel and I, we did speak about globalization. That it's a huge focus for us this year. We know that we default to US centric. And on this call between both Rachel and I, that ends up being in my space even, because I'm the one in the US, we really do have that problem. And we know we do. And it's not just building out team members across the globe, even though that is part of it, but it's utilizing our network. And I don't even think we have that full network set up yet across the company.
I echo that. I think for me, it would be that. And then also looking at our policies and processes as a company, one of the things we're also looking to do is an audit. And really looking at where we're at and where we need to be better. And I think if I could just chuck,
love a good audit.
Bring it to us, scare people. That word is like a word that we're like, do we use that word?
We're like, audit?
That's where I think I would also, because I think that's where you're going to really see impact, right? If you're going to look at the very process and policies that you have in your company and what you can do to change, I think that's where I would also want to put energy in really trying to help, leaders see that, have the resource to be able to change some of those processes would be incredible. And I'm talking, accessibility. I'm talking everything here. That would really be the goal from my space station as well, because I would love to work from a space station.
The space equity station that centers on globalization. That can be a tongue twister. Don't say that too much. Last question for today. If you could have dinner with anyone, past or present, okay, so they might not be living anymore, that's okay, in the equity space. So this doesn't have to be work center, just equity in general. Who would it be? Who would you break bread with?
Do you know Fearless Futures? No.
Oh, that's a good question.
That one's easy to fulfill, Zack. So don't use this one. Don't use Fearless. Anybody else?
I think I feel like I'm cheating because it's more than one person, but I think, and maybe it's just top of mind because I watched a film on this the other day, but the suffragettes. Okay. I mean, the real activism and the bravery, and just to understand that. I mean, I know that's maybe probably more of a UK thing, but I know it was happening everywhere.
Past, present, in the world.
Yeah, for me, that to me, because I just think the bravery in that generation, I just cannot even get my head around, because, I sometimes get fearful and like, I'm going to make a mistake and say the wrong thing. To have gone back then and like go into like Parliament and be like, this is what's happening and I'm going to show up here. For me, I would just love to understand more about that journey and, the ambitions there. That would be mine.
Mine is such a weird answer, and I'm just going to go with it
No
because
such thing.
I
Go
can't
with
get it
it.
out of my head. They're not even people in the equity space, but
Who?
like CEOs, like the top whatever, the people, the richest people in the
Well,
world.
you know,
Can I just
I
get
like
With the
this
power.
answer.
get them to dinner? If whatever they want to eat, fine. We can get drinks, fine. Like shoulders down, relax for a minute, like just have an actual conversation. Like that this is right? Like this work
Right?
matters. We can talk about money, and you can still make money. Fine, you'll be fine. Believe me. But just have like an
Mm-hmm.
honest conversation about it without
Mm-hmm.
a pretense of business or this and that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think that would be. I would love to be at that dinner.
I see where you're going. I see where you're
Yeah.
going with this. I'm not going to suggest I can help orchestrate this dinner, but I will help plan behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Honestly, thank you both for your time, for your energy, for your thinking faces, because you both were like, ooh, at the same time. It's been such a pleasure. The work that you all are doing at Expedia, I can't wait to hear more and learn more, especially towards the end of the years. Like, we had a goal for globalization. I know it's not complete. That's impossible. But, what have you been able to accomplish? I think I'm really, really excited for you both. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, Rachel and Zach. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for inviting us in. It's a privilege to be here and be able to share what we're up to. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and thank you, Sable. Thank you, Fearless Futures, for having us. This was a great time. I had a lot of fun. Maybe we'll be invited back. Thank you.